Welcome back to 10 Minute Tech. My name is Steve once again, and just a little update on the workstation build and a couple things I wanted to talk about as far as water cooling and loop setup. So this is not the final product, don't let it scare you. These tubes are here just for testing purposes. I used any old scraps that I had to test the water cooling loop, to test the radiators to see if there were any leaks present, to test the pump to ensure that it is fully functional and not leaking as well. And then also to test the thermal paste application on the CPU. Once I got the test all done on the leak test overnight, I went and turned the computer on, got everything running, checked out the GPU riser, the riser cable no issues, and I didn't get any performance loss as compared to my other 2080 Ti, so they performed exactly the same. Sometimes there's a little bit of a compromise using these, and this one's I think 20 centimeters, so there wasn't much of a loss there. But I have seen that sometimes using a larger GPU riser can cost you some performance or stability. This one, just a moderate overclock of about plus 100 on the core and plus 1200 on the memory. And then everything else maxed. This is the GPU that I did the power mod on, but it worked fine with the PCIe riser, and I'm gonna stick with that. As far as the CPU goes, it was idling around 20 Celsius, and I got it to 4.6 gigahertz at 1.15 V-core. I left everything else bone stock and then just went for the V-core on all cores, 1.15, and set 46 max V-core, let everything else, all the power saving features on. And I think I could refine that quite a bit, but I wanted to see what this water cooling loop was capable of. So with that small overclock, I was able to do AVX loads and up into the 70 degrees. And that's probably about where I want that to stay. So I don't know if I'll overclock that anymore, but I may be able to refine the overclock a little bit. And with these CPUs, you can actually overclock per core. And you could get an idea about how the cores perform from Intel's Turbo Boost 3 technology or through EVGA's OC Robot. And it'll actually kind of do a non-AVX Prime 95 load. It's not very heavy and it's not going to get you a good overclock, but it can give you some indication as to what cores require what voltage, and that'll help you figure out which cores you can get to 5 gigahertz. And a couple of these cores on the will actually do 5 gigahertz according to OC Robot. So I didn't try it, and they needed about 1.3 volts. That's going to be too much for this water cooling loop to handle. But it is possible, so this might be a good candidate to put under liquid nitrogen when I get there. So I tested this, everything seemed to work, thermal paste application seemed pretty good, and no issues as far as leaks go. With all that wrapped up, I plan on taking all these excess tubing off and then cutting down the sizes using a couple extensions and more angles to get everything looking nice and clean. And that should wrap up the workstation build once that's complete. I did have to order those because I ran out of fittings to get another T and a drain port on the bottom, so I can have a good place to drain the water out of it. But for now, I've just got distilled water in there, and that's probably what I'll use. And it's my preference to just use distilled water. It has good thermal capacity, and it's not gonna kill your stuff if it leaks. It's very unlikely for distilled water to leak on something and actually cause an arc. I have had another CPU block leak right onto the GPU. The screen kind of glitched out. I shut it off right away, dried everything off, and it was okay. That may not be the case if you get a lot of ions absorbed into the water and particles from the radiator and flux that's left over, so make sure you clean those out really well. And it may not be the case with some of the fluids that you may get from vendors. I just stick with distilled water. It seems to be the safest thing, and plus if it spills on the carpet, it's not going to hurt anything either. As far as cleaning this, I flushed it about 4 or 5 times with distilled water. Some people will give you some different advice. Personally, after I flush the radiators separately on their own, and I'll usually do that with some vinegar and soap, as soon as those are all cleaned out as much as I can, I'll flush the whole loop now all together at least 5 times with water, and I'll run it for 20 to 30 minutes each time. And if you don't have warm water handy, just make sure if you're going to use a kettle or something to warm up the water to put in the loop. Most of the stuff in here shouldn't go over 50 C, namely the pump, and that'll start causing issues with the materials breaking down. So 50C is the limit for the pump, and if you're going to put some warm water in there, don't go over that. I did use a little bit of warm water on the last flush, and then I put some biocide, and it's just a PT Nuke copper safe biocide is all I use in this. It's 4 drops per liter. I think I put about 6 or 8 drops in this one based on the volume that's in there. So right now I'm waiting on a couple more hardware fittings to come in, and like I said, the extension coming from the GPU up to the CPU, and then a couple 90s to make some of this stuff look nicer. I think it'll come together really nice. One other thing I wanted to point out, this case I bought from Newegg, and the front foot was actually all crushed up. It sat in the box for about 3 or 4 months before I got to do this build. I sent an email to Lee & Lee, and they just sent me another foot. I never interacted with them as far as customer service goes, but they were super quick in responding, and they sent this out FedEx, same day. So that was really cool of them, and I'll probably buy another Lee & Lee product. Just so everybody's aware, I bought this myself for about 130 bucks from Newegg in August, and it's my first Lee & Lee case, but I did like building in this case. It is a little smaller than it looks. You don't get a whole lot of options. There's nowhere to put a fan or a radiator on the back. And they made a lot of compromises in order to put dual power supply access. Now, one of those, you can put some hard drives in it, and I may or may not use those. But in this build, I'll probably just use network storage for the videos. But other than that, it's a pretty solid build. I know Lee & Lee's coming out with distro plates for the front, so those can be cool. You can also get those off of AliExpress. And that's actually where I got all of hardware for water cooling. Does take about a month to get here, and it is a bit cheaper, but to be honest, a lot of the radiators that you'll get from various vendors get theirs from a factory in China, and as long as you clean them out, they'll be just as good. Both of these radiators are from a company named Bixby, is I think how you say it, and they are pretty good. I've used them in about 3 or 4 different builds. I've got 6 or 7 of the radiators in various computers throughout the time that I've been building with water cooling, and I've got them all from AliExpress, and every single one have worked pretty well. They're both 28 millimeters thick, so they're relatively thin, and that's nice because I was able to fit it behind in the back side of the chassis in the case. That way I can have only the fans in the front, and it doesn't impede on anything up there. As far as fan orientation, I found the easiest way to go about this, since the radiators will be collecting the heat, is to have both fans exhausting. That may seem strange because you typically want airflow to come through the case. But in this particular case where both radiators are hot, if one of them's blowing hot air, that hot air is going to come right out into the other radiator and not get much cooling efficiency out of it. So I got to try out a couple fans in the bottom, pull air up through the bottom and then out through the top and the back side. Luckily, this case has a whole lot of ventilation, and it's not really designed for a negative pressure setup, but that's okay. I'll just dust it off whenever needed, and honestly, as long as you have airflow, it doesn't really matter. You can check a whole bunch of other YouTube videos about this. I think Linus actually did one recently where they had some computers set up in a positive pressure, negative pressure, and then like a low, no flow type situation. They had a couple different examples, and I think they left them for about a year. And the positive and the negative, they had some different aspects and where dust collected, but if you clean your computer every year, you should be totally fine in a regular environment. So I'm going to go with that on this build, both exhaust, intake on the bottom, and that should cover it. Once I get the hardware in from AliExpress, I'll finish up this build and show the final product. I'll see you next time.